Okay, let's unpack this. What if the very fabric of democracy could unravel, not with a bang, but, well, with a whisper? Not with tanks in the streets, but through a series of seemingly legal, even, mundane bureaucratic adjustments.
Right. It's a subtle erosion.
It's a compelling, maybe unsettling thought, and it's precisely what we're diving into today. Our core topic is understanding this subtle yet profound erosion of democratic norms and institutions.
Yeah.
We'll be using Hungary as a really chillingly precise case study, and then drawing crucial conceptual parallels to the United States.
And that comparison is key, I think.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to cut through the noise and give you, the curious learner, a clear understanding of the underlying mechanisms of democratic backsliding.
Equip you with the tools, really.
Exactly. Yeah. Actionable insights so you can recognize these shifts in real time. We're distilling the most important knowledge from the sources you've shared with us.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how the appearance of democracy can be so meticulously maintained, like a stage set almost.
Yeah, the facade.
Exactly. While its actual substance is hollowed out behind the scenes, we'll explore how legal means can be, well, weaponized, how the information environment is subtly reshaped, and perhaps most importantly, why citizens often don't perceive this fundamental change until it's, frankly, far too late.
Right.
So, to give you a high-level roadmap of our deep dive, first, we'll dissect Hungary's slow-boil democratic backsliding. We'll look at the specific, often very legalistic methods they used.
Right.
Then we'll pivot. We'll draw direct conceptual parallels to the United States, illustrating where these kinds of mechanisms might pop up closer to home. And finally, we'll explore the psychological and sociological underpinnings. Like, why do citizens in these environments often fail to recognize the shift? We'll delve into the powerful force of tribalism and how it shapes perceptions of democracy itself.
So Hungary, it's often cited as the canonical case of democratic backsliding, isn't it? Precisely because most citizens didn't experience it as some kind of sudden, dramatic regime change.
No, not at all.
It was more like, a slow boil. Think of it like this, the analogy. Put a frog in cold water, slowly turn up the heat.
Right, it adjusts incrementally.
It never perceives the danger until it's too late. Unlike if you threw it straight into boiling water.
A very apt, if grim, analogy here.
Yeah. And the initial trigger for Hungary's transformation. The sources point to Viktor Orban's Fidesz party winning a constitutional supermajority back in 2010.
That was the moment.
So what's the significance of a supermajority? Why was that so crucial?
Well, that's the absolute starting gun for this kind of subtle erosion. A supermajority isn't just, a simple majority to pass ordinary laws.
Right, it's much more powerful.
It granted Fidesz the power to fundamentally rewrite the Constitution itself and to alter key elements of the legal and institutional framework without needing any opposition support.
Wow.
It was, like you said, pretty much a blank check to re-engineer the entire state from the ground up, all while staying within the bounds of what appeared to be legal procedures. And this is precisely where the concept of autocratic legalism really comes into play. Orban's government didn't stage a military coup, obviously.
No tanks.
No tanks. They meticulously, systematically used the law itself to subvert democracy. They rewrote the constitutional order, fundamentally refitted the electoral system, brought independent oversight bodies under government control, and consolidated the media. And the critical point, the really crucial thing, is they did nearly all of this through legal means.
Right, the veneer of legality.
Exactly. Carefully maintaining the outward rituals of democracy. Scholar Kim Lane-Sheppel actually coined the term autocratic legalism to describe this twisting of the state's own tools.
And the laws.
Yeah, its legal framework, its legislative processes to undermine its liberal foundations is not about breaking the law. It's about making the law an instrument of authoritarian control. Sheppel further described this cumulative process as creating a Frankenstate. It's quite a vivid image, isn't it?
It really is, like stitching things together.
Exactly. Imagine a mechanic meticulously assembling individual car parts. Each part, a steering wheel, an engine, a brake pedal, is perfectly legitimate, perfectly lawful on its own.
Okay.
But the finished vehicle, the Frankenstate, is something monstrous, something designed for control, not freedom or, normal democratic function.
So the danger isn't one specific broken law.
Precisely. It's the aggregate effect of many legal actions that, when stitched together, create an entirely different type of regime.
Can you give some concrete examples?
Sure. The Hungarian government literally rewrote their constitution multiple times. They altered electoral rules in ways that systematically favored the ruling party, shifting boundaries, changing regulations.
Gerrymandering and more.
And more, yes. They brought previously independent oversight institutions like parts of the judiciary or the media council under direct government control, really eroding their ability to act as checks on power. And then there was the significant consolidation of media, which we'll get into. Each of these steps, presented in isolation, might appear as, well, legitimate policy choices.
Just politics as usual, maybe.
Right. But their combined impact transforms a liberal democracy into an illiberal one, all while maintaining this deceptive facade of democratic process.
It's quite insidious. And what's really interesting is that elections kept happening in Hungary. They didn't stop holding elections.
No, the ritual continued.
And on election day itself, they often looked quite well run. So how could international observers call them well run and yet at the same time signal a profound problem?
That sounds contradictory on the surface.
It does, but it's a critical diagnostic point. It distinguishes that superficial adherence to procedures from, substantive democratic practice.
Okay.
The OCODHR and the OAC Parliamentary Assembly, in their 2022 assessment of Hungary's parliamentary vote, illustrate this perfectly. They stated the elections were well run on the day.
Meaning the polling stations worked.
Right. It refers to the visible mechanics. Polling stations were open, ballots were cast, votes counted without overt interference.
That part looked okay. But they immediately added the crucial caveat. The election was marred by pervasive overlap between the ruling party and the state, along with systemic media bias and opaque campaign finance.
So the context. The playing field itself.
Exactly. It signals that while the formalities were intact, the voting booths, the ballot counting, the impartiality of the state in administering the election, and the pluralism of political discourse were just hollowed out.
The game was rigged beforehand.
Fundamentally unlevel. And this is precisely why ordinary voters understandably miss the constitutional stakes. If the ballot box still exists, if they can still go and cast a vote, and if there's a winner and a loser formally declared...
It feels like democracy.
It feels like democracy, right. Even if the entire game was rigged long before a single vote was cast, the outward rituals maintain a perception of legitimacy, effectively masking the substantive erosion of fairness.
Okay, so if the playing field isn't level, how do you make sure people don't notice the tilt? Or at least enough people don't notice?
Right.
It seems controlling the information environment would be pretty crucial. And Hungary, as you mentioned, offers a kind of masterclass in this, showing how to get significant media control without resorting to, obvious bans or censorship.
Exactly. Hungary's approach to media consolidation is truly striking and very instructive. By 2018, this entity called the Central European Press and Media Foundation, or KESMA,
right,
had pooled more than 400 pro-government outlets. Think about that number. Over 400.
That's huge concentration.
Immense. And what's particularly indicative of this autocratic legalism is that by government decree, KESMA was explicitly exempted from competition review.
So the state basically rubber-stamped the monopoly.
Pretty much. This wasn't just a large business merger. It was a state-sanctioned legal maneuver that concentrated an enormous portion of the national media landscape into a single government-aligned entity. The genius, if you can call it that, the tactical cleverness, is that it wasn't about outright banning independent media. That would invite immediate international outcry.
Too blatant.
Too blatant. Instead, it was a sophisticated legal maneuver that, with a veneer of democratic branding, functionally concentrated the information space.
Can you give us an analogy for that?
Sure. Imagine like a vibrant, diverse garden of news outlets, all sorts of different plants and flowers.
Okay.
Suddenly, it's systematically pruned and shaped into a single uniform hedge, all facing the same direction, all reflecting the same light. The diversity, the independence, it's just gone, replaced by a controlled, homogeneous information source. And independent monitoring, like Bater-Fee's estimates and Meirtech Media Monitor surveys, consistently found large parts of the market under de facto government influence, plus persistent bias in public service media.
So it wasn't technically censorship, but the effect.
The effect was soft capture, no overt bans needed. This was sufficient to create what some call an information ghetto for government supporters.
An echo chamber.
A massive echo chamber where Alternative viewpoints were systematically minimized or just entirely absent. It created an environment making it incredibly difficult for a significant portion of the population to perceive or even understand the subtle democratic shifts happening around them.
Okay, let's pause here for our first micro recap. We're about 5 minutes in. So far, we've seen how Hungary's democratic backsliding wasn't a sudden coup, right?
Not at all.
It was a meticulous, legalistic re-engineering of the state. We use the terms autocratic legalism and the Frankenstate.
That's right, using legal tools to dismantle democracy from within.
And the elections might look fine on the surface, but the underlying playing field, especially with media consolidation like KESMA, is fundamentally tilted.
Precisely. The form remains, but the fairness is gone.
Okay, so beyond media control, another classic move we see in these scenarios is the normalization of the exception, making temporary emergency powers, well, permanent.
Yes, it's a very common technique.
It sounds like a clever way to centralize power without ever declaring a full-blown, undeniable crisis that might provoke more backlash.
It is, and Hungary provides a textbook case here as well. Since May 2022, Hungary has maintained a rolling state of danger, ostensibly linked to the Ukraine war.
Okay, so there's a justification given.
Always a justification.
Yeah.
However, the European Commission's 2025 Rule of Law report specifically notes fresh, successive extensions of this state of danger, and it stresses a profoundly alarming implication.
Which is?
These decrees, issued under the state of danger, can effectively override acts of parliament.
Wow. So the executive can just bypass the legislature.
In many critical areas, yes. It means the executive can sidestep the normal legislative process and its inherent checks and balances. The implications are really far-reaching. Human Rights Watch and the Hungarian Helsinki Committee have documented how this effectively permanent emergency status systematically erodes fundamental checks on power.
Like oversight.
Oversight, public access to records. The public's ability to scrutinize government actions is significantly diminished. It illustrates that consistent pattern. Legality is always the facade.
But consolidation of power is the goal.
Consolidation of power is the underlying substance. It's about creating this perpetual crisis, a never-ending sense of urgency or threat that then justifies executive overreach and the circumvention of normal democratic processes.
Ruling by decree becomes the new normal.
Exactly. It allows the government to rule by decree, making what was supposed to be temporary and exceptional into a normalized, almost routine mode of governance.
Okay, so if you're consolidating power, controlling information, normalizing emergency rule, you also need to address any critical voices or centers of independent thought, right?
Absolutely essential from their perspective.
And civil society organizations, NGOs, universities, they're often prime targets because they represent independent thought, research, critique.
They're potential sources of opposition or inconvenient truths.
So how did Hungary approach this? Without resorting to outright bans or, heavy-handed crackdowns that would look bad internationally.
This is a particularly chilling aspect of the Frankenstate strategy because it really highlights how subtly repressive measures can be employed. The Central European University, CEU, its forced relocation to Vienna after the passage of Lex CEU.
Right, I remember that.
It's emblematic. This wasn't an outright prohibition or a direct shutdown order that would have been too crude.
Again, too blatant.
Exactly. Instead, it was a sophisticated bureaucratic attack. The government used complex accreditation rules, administrative hurdles, new legal requirements specifically designed, it seemed, to make it impossible for CEU to operate in Hungary.
While claiming it was just about standards.
Precisely. All while maintaining a gloss of formal compliance with abstract legal principles. They could claim, look, we didn't shut them down, they just couldn't meet our new perfectly legal standards. It was effectively death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. Similarly, consider the European Court of Justice's ruling that Hungary's mass forced retirement of judges was unlawful. This was a clear legal judgment against a government action that purged judges seen as independent.
So the court pushed back.
The court pushed back. However, here's the classic illustration of Scheppel's Frankenstate trap in action. The Hungarian government merely paid compensation to the affected judges.
Okay, they complied with the compensation part.
Yes, but they retained the personnel changes that mattered most. The critical, independent-minded judges were still gone, often replaced by government-friendly appointees. The judiciary's independence remained compromised.
So the remedy didn't fix the underlying problem.
Exactly. The legal remedy addressed a single, isolated violation, the forced retirement. But the cumulative redesign of the entire system, the fundamental reshaping of the judiciary's composition and loyalty, persisted and entrenched itself.
Like patching a tiny hole.
Right, like patching a tiny hole in a ship to satisfy regulations, while the entire hull is being fundamentally reshaped beneath the waterline, changing its very nature and direction.
And just when you think you've seen every tactic, new ones emerge. More recently, Hungary rolled out something called sovereignty protection. Sounds quite patriotic.
It sounds innocuous, doesn't it? But its function appears anything but. By 2023-2025, a new sovereignty protection architecture was established, specifically targeting foreign-funded NGOs and independent media.
Foreign-funded being the key phrase there.
Absolutely, that's the justification. And what's more, further blacklisting and enforcement powers were proposed for 2025. These measures are widely compared to foreign agents regimes seen in more overtly authoritarian states like Russia.
Ah, okay, that comparison tells you a lot.
It does. But again, it's crucial to understand the nuance. This isn't usually about overt repression, like a knock-on-the-door arrest, at least not initially.
Play is more subtle.
It's about administrative intimidation, creating a chilling effect on critics. By labeling organizations as foreign-funded or potentially undermining sovereignty, the government creates a climate of suspicion.
Makes them look unpatriotic or like puppets.
Exactly. It opens the door to audits, imposes burdensome reporting requirements, forces these groups to divert scarce resources away from their actual work towards just compliance. It can stigmatize them, discourage donors.
And the result?
The result is a shrinking space for independent voices, for critical civil society, all while carefully preserving the outward democratic signage. It's another sophisticated legal squeeze designed to look legitimate while achieving fundamentally illiberal ends. Okay, let's do another recap, maybe around the 10-minute mark here. To recap where we've been with Hungary's trajectory, it shows a clear pattern of these legalistic maneuvers, right?
Yeah, definitely.
From controlling the media through soft capture and KESMA, to normalizing emergency rule and subtly squeezing critical institutions like universities and NGOs using bureaucratic tools.
Not outright force, but administrative pressure.
Exactly. Each step, while maybe appearing legal on its own, contributes piece by piece to a consolidated illiberal state.
So, given all these subtle changes, the legal reengineering, the information control, the squeezing of independent institutions, how did the average Hungarian actually perceive what was happening? This is the big question. Did they see a regime change in real time, or did the slow boil work exactly as intended?
This is perhaps the most disquieting aspect. The stark, almost unbelievable disconnect between citizen perception and expert assessment. For many Hungarians, they simply didn't see a regime change.
Why not?
Because their information environment, meticulously shaped by the state's influence, framed everything as normal politics. If the news you consume day in, day out consistently portrays government actions as legitimate, necessary, or even popular, why would you think otherwise?
Your reality is shaped by the information you get.
Precisely, and a 2022 Pew survey starkly illustrates this. Only 38% of Hungarians believe the country had become less democratic under Orban.
Only 38%. That's low.
It is. But what's even more surprising, a significant one-third actually said it had become more democratic.
More democratic.
That's the perception shaped by the narrative. And among Fidesz sympathizers, Orban's party, a mere 15% perceived any democratic decline at all.
Wow.
This is crucial. Orban's approval remained at a majority level 57%, even as these fundamental changes were well underway. This isn't just a slight difference in opinion, it's a fundamental divergence in perceived reality for large segments of the population.
And other data supports this disconnect.
Yes. Adding to this, a 2023 policy brief by Lane and Zwang revealed a widening disconnect between expert indices, things like VDem or Freedom House, which showed falling liberal democracy scores in Eastern EU states like Hungary.
Okay, the expert view.
Right. And on the other hand, Eurobarometer trend data, which showed increased citizen satisfaction with how democracy works in those same countries.
Increased satisfaction while democracy is declining. How does that work?
Crucially, the study found the satisfaction strongly tracked whether one's preferred side was in office.
Ah. So if my party is winning and in power, then democracy, by definition, must be working, regardless of the underlying shifts in rules or norms.
Exactly. It's an outcome-based perception. And this phenomenon is precisely what Sergei Guriev and Daniel Treisman describe in their book, Spin Dictators. They argue modern autocrats sustain support not through mass terror, like in the olden days.
No gulags needed.
Right. But by masterfully manipulating information and using plausibly legal procedures, convincing citizens everything is essentially normal or even better than before, avoiding overt, easily recognizable repression is key.
Okay, so that's the citizen perception. What about the expert consensus?
Well, contrast that with the blunt reality from expert communities. VDEM's 2025 report classified Hungary as an electoral autocracy for the 7th consecutive year.
7th year.
Yes. The European Parliament's 2022 resolution stated unequivocally that Hungary is no longer a full democracy, but a hybrid regime of electoral autocracy.
Pretty clear language.
Very clear. And the OSCE's 2022 statement explicitly closed the loop with its assessment of an absence of a level playing field in the elections, meaning the vote is competitive in form, maybe, but not in fairness.
So the experts see it, but the public lags behind.
Massively lags. It took years for many observers, let alone voters inside Hungary, to fully accept this description, and many still reject it today. It demonstrates a profound and genuinely dangerous lag in public recognition of democratic erosion.
What a journey through Hungary's democratic transformation. It's a sobering look at how a system can be fundamentally altered without ever truly breaking in the traditional obvious sense.
Indeed. The Hungarian case offers a critical, if chilling, blueprint for how democracies can erode from within. Let's try and distill the core mechanisms we've explored into some key takeaways, like mental flashcards for you to hold on to.
Okay, a mega recap of Chapter 1 and then the flashcards.
Right. So, the mega recap. Hungary illustrates autocratic legalism and the Frankenstate model. The rule of law is basically used to dismantle liberal democracy from within. They retain the outward rituals, like elections.
But gut the substance.
Exactly. Gutting the substance through means like consolidated media, normalizing emergency powers, squeezing independent institutions. And crucially, citizen perception often lags way behind expert analysis. Why? Because of controlled information environments and, as we'll discuss more, partisan loyalty.
Okay, so what about those flashcard bullet points?
Yeah.
Key mechanisms.
All right, flashcard time. First, autocratic legalism, using legal means to undermine democracy.
Got it.
Second, Frankenstate. That's the incremental assembly of lawful parts into an illiberal whole. Remember the car analogy.
Right, the monstrous car.
Third, well-run but unlevel elections. Elections appear fair on the surface, but the playing field is rigged beforehand.
Media funding state resources.
I'll live it. Fourth, information ghetto. That's soft media capture, no outright bans needed, creating echo chambers.
Okay.
Fifth, permanent emergency. Temporary powers get normalized. Bypassing parliament, becoming the routine.
Six.
Administrative intimidation, squeezing NGOs, universities, critics through bureaucratic means, not overt force, death by paperwork.
Subtle but effective.
Very. Seventh, citizen blind spot. Due to information control and partisan loyalty, the public often doesn't perceive the regime change as it's happening.
The boiling frog.
Exactly. And finally, eighth, expert consensus, like VDEM, the European Parliament, identifies Hungary as an electoral autocracy, highlighting that huge gap with popular perception.
Okay, those are some potent takeaways from the Hungarian case. Okay, so now that we've deeply understood Hungary's journey, the obvious and maybe uncomfortable question for many of us is, what does this teach us about potential vulnerabilities in the U.S.? It's not about tanks in the streets here, obviously, and our systems are very different.
Right. The comparison isn't literal, it's conceptual.
So how do we draw these parallels conceptually rather than identically?
Exactly. Hungary provides a chilling conceptual warning. It demonstrates that constitutional rewiring, systematic personnel purges, and extensive media capture can be fully clothed in legality. The U.S. analog isn't about identical institutions or, overt authoritarian moves happening tomorrow.
It's more subtle.
It's about the cumulative effect of specific legal doctrines, executive orders, administrative directives that, taken together, could fundamentally reshape the power landscape here. These are the kinds of subtle, incremental changes that should genuinely alarm us based on the Hungarian precedent.
Can you illustrate with some potential U.S. examples that resonate with that spirit of autocratic legalism?
Sure. Let's think conceptually. Consider legal doctrines surrounding presidential impunity. Things like arguing for very broad interpretations of official acts immunity. If interpreted expansively, this could effectively insulate a president from legal accountability for actions taken while in office, no matter how problematic.
So not a constitutional rewrite, but a legal reinterpretation with huge consequences.
Precisely. Or think about efforts toward politicized prosecution. trying to align prosecutorial decisions and the enforcement of justice with political agendas, rather than the impartial application of the law. This fundamentally erodes the independence of the justice system from political influence.
Using the Justice Department for political ends.
That's the concern. And perhaps one of the starkest examples relating to personnel changes like we saw in Hungary is the potential revival of something called Schedule F.
Schedule F, right, that came up before. What would it do?
This executive order, if re-implemented, could reclassify tens of thousands of federal employees. It would move them from protected career civil service positions to essentially at-will appointees.
Meaning they could be fired easily.
Yeah.
For political reasons.
Exactly, making them susceptible to political firing. This would fundamentally erode the neutrality and expertise of the civil service, aiming to create a bureaucracy loyal primarily to the executive's political agenda, rather than committed to impartial public service.
So undermining the idea of a professional, nonpartisan government workforce.
Correct. And Chappelle's warning here is crucial. The comparative lesson is conceptual, not identical. When the formal checklists of democracies seem satisfied case by case, this action is legal, that appointment followed procedure, the aggregate change, the compounding effect of these seemingly disparate legal and administrative moves can still be regime level.
The Frankenstate emerges piece by piece.
Right. It's the subtle compounding erosion of guardrails, the normalization of previously unacceptable executive power that ultimately leads to a fundamentally different form of governance, all while maintaining the outward rituals of democracy.
Okay, let's talk information control again. Hungary's KESMA, consolidating over 400 outlets, created that information ghetto through soft capture, not censorship. How could something functionally similar happen here in the U.S., given our, stronger First Amendment protections and different media structures?
Yeah, direct KESMA-style centralization in the U.S. is indeed much harder. Our legal framework and media ownership landscape are very different. However, the goals
are the same.
The goals can be the same. To create a dominant, one-sided information environment that benefits the ruling party or a particular political movement. And those goals can be approximated through various means, achieving an unlevel playing field that still, on the surface, looks like a vibrant marketplace of ideas.
So how do you approximate KESMA without actually creating KESMA?
Well, we've seen some of these approximation methods already gaining traction. Consider the rise and prominence of government-friendly outlets. These aren't necessarily directly controlled by the state, but they are ideologically aligned and often function as de facto mouthpieces for a particular political faction.
Amplifying certain narratives.
Amplifying preferred narratives, attacking critics, dismissing critical reporting from other sources. Then there's the tactic of strategic access and credentialing.
Controlling who gets access to briefings or interviews.
Exactly. Granting preferential access to favored media outlets while making it increasingly difficult for critical journalists to cover official proceedings or get substantive answers. Another method is the effort to defund disfavored public media, which are often perceived as being more objective or critical.
Attacking PBS or NPR funding, for example.
That's a recurring theme, and perhaps one of the most effective methods in the modern era is flooding the zone with coordinated narrative.
The fire hose of falsehood idea.
Pretty much. Deliberately overwhelming the information space with partisan messages, sometimes contradictory ones. The sheer volume and repetition make it harder for objective facts or nuanced reporting to penetrate the noise.
So the mechanism is different, but the aim is similar.
The aim is the same: to create an information environment where one viewpoint dominates, where one set of narratives prevails. Even if formal media freedom technically remains intact, it achieves that soft capture effect through different means.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. We talked about Hungary's rolling state of danger and how it allows executive power to become largely unchecked. How does this concept translate to the U.S. context? We also have emergency powers, but maybe we think of them as more temporary or strictly defined.
Well, that's the common perception, but the reality is, in the U.S., executive emergency powers are far broader and more expensive than most people realize. There are literally hundreds of statutory provisions that grant the president extraordinary powers during a declared national emergency.
Hundreds, wow.
Hundreds. The crucial lesson from Hungary isn't just the existence of these powers, but the need to scrutinize any effort to keep temporary domestic security measures or other emergency actions on a rolling, indefinite basis. rather than allowing them to expire as intended.
So preventing the temporary from becoming permanent.
Exactly. For instance, consider how powers related to, say, military deployment for domestic security purposes or expansive immigration enforcement measures, powers initially framed as temporary responses to specific crises, could potentially be extended indefinitely.
If the crisis is never declared over.
Right. If a crisis is framed as perpetual, then the temporary powers designed to address it can also become perpetual. This effectively normalizes what should be exceptional executive authority, and maintaining a sense of perpetual emergency is a classic autocratic technology.
Why is it so useful for them?
Because it's used to disable veto points within the system, those institutional checks like legislative oversight, judicial review, or the independence of certain agencies. By operating under an ongoing state of emergency, the executive can centralize decision-making, bypass normal legislative processes, and circumvent judicial oversight much more easily.
Citing the emergency as justification.
Precisely. The European Commission's 2025 Rule of Law Report and Human Rights Watch's 2024 report on Hungary explicitly highlight how this allows governments to operate outside normal democratic accountability, using the crisis real or manufactured as a constant justification for increased executive overreach.
That's fascinating, but yeah, a little unsettling. This next point you brought up from the sources is truly insightful, I think. Identity beats institutions. What does that mean for how people actually view democracy itself, and how does it manifest in their behavior?
It's a profound observation, and it gets right to the heart of why democratic backsliding can occur with significant public acquiescence or even enthusiasm from some quarters. Hungarian polling, as we discussed, clearly showed how satisfaction with democracy became highly outcome-driven. For many citizens, their perception of whether democracy was functioning properly was directly tied to whether their preferred political party was in power.
So if my side wins, democracy works. If my side loses, it's suspect.
Exactly. It's a highly conditional view of democratic legitimacy. And the U.S. data after 2024 tells precisely the same story, just in mirror image. Remember that AP-NORC poll from December 2024? It showed that Republicans' trust in election accuracy rebounded sharply when their side won the presidency.
Right, every years of low trust following 2020.
Precisely. This is a powerful illustration of contingent trust, not some deep, unwavering institutional confidence in democratic processes, regardless of the outcome. It strongly suggests that trust isn't based on the inherent fairness of the system, but on whether it delivers the desired partisan outcome.
This ties into specific political science dynamics.
Yes, it directly relates to two key dynamics identified by scholars. First, there's the Sfolik dynamic, named after Yale's Milan Sfolik. His research suggests that partisans are often willing to trade off democratic principles for their team's victory.
Party over principle.
Essentially, yes. They prioritize their preferred candidate or party, even if that candidate exhibits behavior that clearly undermines democratic norms. For them, the stakes of their team winning are perceived as so high that violating norms becomes acceptable, even necessary.
And the second dynamic.
That's the Guriev-Treiman dynamic from spin dictators we touched on earlier. It adds another layer. These spin regimes effectively leverage a sense of identity threat. They strategically deploy selective facts, potent narratives, sometimes even conspiracy theories, to keep their supporters intensely loyal and on side.
Making them feel under attack.
Exactly. It's about convincing the base that the stakes are truly existential, that the opposing side poses such a fundamental threat to their values, their way of life, their identity, that it justifies any means necessary to secure or maintain power. In that context, institutional health becomes secondary to tribal victory.
Right. It's easy, maybe comforting, to think that international bodies like the EU or established legal systems can act as a backstop, protecting democracy as a last resort. But Hungary's case seems to offer a much more sober lesson here, doesn't it? That external pressure isn't some kind of magic bullet.
It really isn't. The European Union, despite its foundational commitment to democratic values and the rule of law, found that its various disciplinary mechanisms, things like conditioning funds, issuing critical reports, initiating infringement procedures, while they may have slowed the process of autocratization in Hungary, they ultimately did not stop it.
So they had an effect, but not a decisive one.
They applied some friction, yes. Funds were conditioned, reports were written, resolutions were passed by the European Parliament in 2022 declaring it an electoral autocracy. Yet the system consolidated regardless. VDEM's 2025 report still classifies Hungary the same way.
So what's the lesson for Americans?
This is a profoundly sober lesson, especially for Americans who might be tempted to kind of outsource democratic defense to the courts or to international shaming or to some form of external pressure.
Relying on institutions alone isn't enough.
It seems not. The reality is that without strong domestic coalitions willing to pay the opportunity costs of actively resisting these changes, willing to mobilize, to protest, to vote strategically, to pressure their own leaders, and maybe even make personal or political sacrifices for democratic principles, expert reports or external pressure often change very little on the ground.
Internal resilience is key.
Internal resilience is paramount. External guardrails can serve as a warning signal or apply some friction, absolutely, but they cannot replace robust internal vigilance and, crucially, action by citizens and domestic political actors themselves.
Okay, let's try another micro recap here, maybe around the 15-minute mark. We're seeing some alarming conceptual parallels between Hungary's erosion and potential vulnerabilities in the U.S., aren't we?
We are. It's not identical, but the patterns resonate.
From legal loopholes or interpretations that could empower presidents, like official acts immunity or Schedule F.
Right, weakening checks and balances through legal means.
To sophisticated information control tactics that avoid outright censorship but still create an unlevel playing field.
Approximating the KESMA effect.
And the normalization of emergency powers, plus that really powerful idea of identity-beating institutions.
Yeah, where partisan loyalty overrides democratic principles.
It really highlights the need for vigilance here. Okay, let's distill this chapter too. What are the key lessons the U.S. can take from Hungary, maybe in that flashcard format again?
Absolutely. Understanding these conceptual parallels helps us identify warning signs and potential vulnerabilities closer to home. So, flashcards for Chapter 2, U.S. lessons. First, legalism's camouflage. Remember that legal actions, individually defensible, can mask regime-level change. Think about the U.S. context. Things like expansive interpretations of official acts immunity or mechanisms like Schedule F to politicize the bureaucracy.
Got it. Legal cover for power grabs.
Second, soft information control. The goals of something like KESMA can be achieved indirectly, even with strong free press protections. Things like promoting friendly media, narrative flooding, strategic access. An analog, not a copy.
Okay.
Third, permanent emergency risk. We need to scrutinize any efforts to make temporary emergency powers permanent, especially related to things like domestic military deployment or immigration enforcement.
Keep the temporary temporary.
Exactly. Fourth, identity over institutions. This is huge. Partisan loyalty can override democratic principles when sides conflict. We see this in the U.S. with election trust becoming contingent on who wins.
My side wins, the system works.
That's the dangerous logic. And fifth, domestic resistance is key. International or judicial guardrails alone are not enough. Without internal coalitions willing to actively defend democratic norms, external pressure has limited effect.
So it comes down to citizens and domestic actors.
Ultimately, yes, internal resilience is critical.
So given all these subtle changes we've detailed and the careful preservation of democratic rituals like elections, why didn't more Hungarians recognize what was happening? What made it so difficult to see the fundamental nature of their governance was shifting right under their feet?
It's a critical question, and there are several overlapping factors. One major factor is simply procedural continuity.
Things look the same on the surface.
Exactly. When you still have regular elections, when courts are still, nominally issuing decisions, and when opposition parties are still technically on the ballot, it creates a powerful cognitive inertia.
Cognitive inertia.
Yeah, people tend to update their understanding of political reality based on visible ruptures. A sudden coup, mass arrests, tanks in the streets, things that are undeniably different.
Not based on invisible tilts or slow erosion.
Right. It's that boiling frog analogy again. If you put a frog in cold water and slowly, gradually increase the temperature, it never perceives the fundamental change until it's too late. It adjusts to each incremental increase, making it seem normal.
The outward forms provide a comforting, but ultimately deceptive illusion of normalcy.
Perfectly put. That continuity masks the underlying decay.
And of course, if the information environment is being actively shaped, as we saw with KESMA in Hungary, that's going to profoundly affect what people see and understand, right? It creates a kind of blind spot for many.
Absolutely. Information asymmetry plays a huge, almost deterministic role in this lack of recognition. In Hungary, remember, regional daily newspapers and public television were largely captured through those soft capture methods.
Right. The KESMA effect again.
which meant a significant share of voters simply never encountered independent framing or critical perspectives on the government's actions. Their daily news diet was consistently filtered through a pro-government lens, which minimized or outright dismissed any dissenting viewpoints.
So they literally weren't getting the other side of the story.
Or they were getting a heavily distorted version of it. And this mirrors the closed epistemic loops we see forming and perhaps hardening in the U.S.
The filter bubbles.
Exactly, where partisan media and social networks create these echo chambers. Within these bubbles, inconvenient facts or criticisms are easily dismissed as fake news or just partisan attacks. Loyalty to the in-group is rewarded.
And data shows this split in the U.S.
Oh, clearly. Pew Research Center data explicitly shows Republicans and Democrats literally inhabit different news universes. They consume different sources, trust different sources, and therefore operate with different sets of perceived facts. This epistemic closure prevents a shared understanding of reality, making it incredibly difficult for individuals within these bubbles to recognize systemic shifts that might challenge their worldview.
So if my side is in power, then everything must be fine, and any criticism of the system is just partisan sour grapes. It sounds like a deeply instrumental view of democracy itself, like it's just a tool to get your side power.
Precisely. This is what scholars term partisan instrumentalism. It means that if our side governs, if our preferred party and leader are in office, then by definition, democracy is working.
The outcome justifies the means, or proves the system works.
Exactly. This mindset effectively blunts any alarm bells that might otherwise ring when norms are broken or institutions are undermined. The outcome, my side winning, is prioritized over the integrity of the process or the long-term health of democratic institutions.
And the data confirms this kind of thinking.
Yes. The data from Pew 2022 and Free 2023 clearly shows this pattern. For example, remember that significant rebound in Republican trust in U.S. election accuracy after their side won the presidency in 2024.
Yeah, a clear example.
It's a textbook U.S. example of this phenomenon. It's about a contingent belief, where trust is granted if the outcome is favorable to one side. If the ballot box delivers a victory for your team, it feels like democracy is functional properly, even if the rules of the game have been subtly twisted or norms have been violated along the way.
And the fact that everything in Hungary was done legally, or at least framed as being within the bounds of some interpretation of the law, that must have made it even harder to criticize effectively, right?
Absolute critical point.
It turns accusations of autocracy into these complex debates about legal interpretation, which are much harder for the general public to grasp or get outraged about.
Exactly right. This is the insidious power of legalistic ambiguity, because every single step taken by Orban's government could be argued, often plausibly to supporters, as being within the rules, even if those rules were recently rewritten precisely to facilitate the power grab.
It makes criticism difficult.
It made accusations of autocracy feel less like a clear structural diagnosis of democratic decline and more like mere partisan rhetoric. Chappelle and the OSCE have highlighted this. If the government can point to a newly passed law or a constitutional amendment and say, see, we follow the law, then critics are easily dismissed by supporters of the ruling party as simply being sore losers or politically motivated actors.
It provides a shield.
It creates a kind of intellectual and rhetorical shield. It's much, much harder to mobilize broad public opposition against something that is formally legal, even if its underlying intent and cumulative effect are profoundly illiberal. The legal framing neutralizes a lot of potential criticism.
So, pulling this chapter together, what's the ultimate takeaway for us here in the U.S. from Hungary's experience of citizens not recognizing the shift? What's the bottom line we should internalize from that?
Hungary teaches a profound and genuinely urgent lesson. You can slide out of liberal democracy without most citizens ever registering a discrete before-after moment.
No single alarm bell rings loud enough.
Right. There isn't usually a single dramatic flashpoint. Instead, the markers of this decline are cumulative, not sudden. They board up over time.
So what are those cumulative markers we should be watching for?
Well, based on the Hungarian model and potentially U.S. parallels, we need to watch for subtle shifts in jurisprudence. That means legal interpretations that systematically lower the cost of presidential abuses, effectively expanding executive power or shielding it from accountability.
Okay, legal changes.
Second, pay close attention to personnel mechanisms that repoliticize a previously neutral civil service. This could involve creating new categories of political appointees, like reviving Schedule F, or systematically replacing nonpartisan civil servants with political loyalists in key positions.
Capturing the bureaucracy.
Third, Observe the methods of information control, achieved often through carrots and sticks, rewarding friendly media, punishing critics, rather than outright bans. Look for that unlevel playing field.
And fourth.
Watch for a permanent emergency posture where supposedly temporary powers are extended indefinitely, allowing the executive to consistently bypass normal legislative and judicial oversight.
Normalizing the exception.
Exactly. And the critical insight here, the really crucial takeaway, is the expert-citizen lag. Expert communities like academics, think tanks, international observers, they will call the trend early.
Like VDEM did with Hungary.
Exactly. VDEM labeled Hungary an electoral autocracy years before many voters accepted it. The European Parliament also declared Hungary a hybrid regime of electoral autocracy in 2022. But mass public recognition often lags significantly, sometimes for years.
Often until it's too late.
Often until the alternation of power becomes practically impossible because the system has been so thoroughly rewired in favor of the incumbent. And this lag, crucially, this is the strategic window in which would-be autocrats entrench their power, making reversal incredibly difficult.
That lag is the danger zone.
Yeah.
Okay, it's unsettling to think that a democracy could erode right under our noses because of these subtle reinforcing factors. But understanding them is the first step, right?
Precisely. Knowing why populations might miss these shifts is absolutely critical for maintaining vigilance. Let's summarize these factors from Chapter 3, flashcard style again. Why people miss the signs.
Okay, hit me with the flashcards.
All right. First, procedural continuity. Elections. Courts still seem to function, creating a false sense of normalcy, the boiling frog. Second, information asymmetry. Controlled media or echo chambers limit exposure to independent perspectives or critical facts.
Living in different realities.
Third, partisan instrumentalism. The belief that my side winning equals democracy working, blinding supporters to norm violations.
Outcome over process.
Fourth, legalistic ambiguity. All actions are framed as legal, deflecting accusations of autocracy as mere partisan attacks.
The legal shield.
Fifth, expert citizen lag. Experts identify the decline early. Mass recognition lags significantly behind.
The critical delay.
And finally, sixth, strategic window. That period of public ignorance or delayed recognition is precisely when autocrats consolidate power and make reversal hard.
That window is key.
Okay.
We've thoroughly examined the mechanics of backsliding, the legalistic reengineering, the information control. Now, let's dive even deeper into the human element, because ultimately it's about people and their choices, their loyalties. Why do so many people remain steadfastly loyal to leaders who seemingly undermine democratic norms and institutions? What keeps the base? The base.
Yeah, this gets to the core of it, doesn't it? The thesis here is pretty blunt, but I think it's essential to grasp. Support for norm-breaking leaders persists, fundamentally, because group identity beats democratic process.
Identity over institutions again.
Pretty much. When partisan identity transcends mere political preference and becomes what some call a mega-identity.
Meaning it encompasses everything.
Yeah, encompassing not just your political views, but your entire worldview, your core values, your social group, maybe even your religious identity, your geography, your lifestyle choices, when it's all bundled together.
Cool.
Many voters will consistently prioritize their team, their tribe, over the integrity of abstract institutions or democratic principles.
And what drives that intense prioritization?
A significant driver, especially in highly polarized environments, is negative partisanship.
Negative partisanship, not just loving your side, but hating the other side.
Exactly. It's not just about liking your own side. It's about deeply loathing, fearing, and fundamentally distrusting the opposing side. This creates a constant sense of threat, an existential danger posed by the other side winning or gaining power.
And how does that threat perception change behavior?
In this environment, breaking established norms is often seen not as a flaw in your leader, but potentially as a desirable feature, especially if it effectively harms or frustrates your perceived enemies.
So norm breaking becomes a weapon against the other side.
Right. The logic becomes, if the existing institutions are captured by the enemy, or if they impede our ability to fight the enemy effectively, then bypassing them, weakening them, or even attacking them becomes necessary, even virtuous.
So followers don't just tolerate it, they might cheer it on.
They may well cheer it on as long as it's their side doing it. And this is further reinforced by what we call those closed epistemic loops.
The echo chambers again.
Right. Partisan media outlets, social networks, they form a sealed world where inconvenient facts, critical reporting, or dissenting viewpoints are easily dismissed as fake news or just partisan attacks. Within this loop, loyalty to the group and its leader is elevated as a supreme virtue.
And questioning the leader is betrayal.
Questioning the leader is seen as a betrayal of the tribe itself. The result is an environment where identity-driven loyalty trumps adherence to democratic processes almost every time. Many supporters will, if forced to choose between their party winning and upholding democratic principles, explicitly put party over democracy.
And that makes accountability almost impossible.
Exceedingly difficult, because any accountability effort, an investigation, impeachment, prosecution, can be immediately recast by the leader and their allies as just another partisan attack against the group itself. This doesn't weaken the base. It often solidifies their resolve. The leader becomes the embodiment of the tribe, and defending the leader becomes synonymous with defending oneself and one's identity.
Let's look at a concrete, very striking example from the sources to ground this thesis. Despite, let's say, unprecedented institutional turmoil and actions that critics called deeply problematic in Donald Trump's second term, things like sustained attacks on the justice system, continued challenges to election results, inflammatory rhetoric against political opponents, his base remained remarkably loyal. How do we explain that specific phenomenon given everything we've just discussed about tribalism?
Yeah, it's a powerful, real-world illustration of the tribalism thesis in action. Polling after his second term consistently showed Republican approval of President Trump staying near 90%.
90%, despite controversies.
Essentially unchanged, even after major political shocks or institutional controversies that might have damaged other politicians. Conversely, Democrats' approval of him remained near zero. This stark intra-party support, this wall of loyalty in the face of upheaval, really underscores just how deeply tribal American politics have become.
So for his core supporters, almost nothing could shake their faith.
It appeared that way. For GOP partisans, virtually no perceived misstep, no scandal, no attack on norms seemed capable of shaking their fundamental faith in their champion. Their loyalty wasn't conditional on his adherence to abstract democratic principles. It seemed absolute, deeply tied to their identity and their perception of him as their fighter.
And this connects to that idea of epistemic breakdown.
Directly. What does epistemic breakdown mean in practice? Well, remember that polling showing 8 in 10 Americans, including 79% of Republicans and 83% of Democrats, saying voters of the two parties cannot agree on basic facts.
Not just policies, but basic facts.
Right. This is a profound and genuinely alarming observation. It's not just that we disagree on policy solutions or values, it's that we fundamentally disagree on the reality those policies are supposed to be based on. When people don't share a common set of facts, meaningful dialogue, compromise, and collective problem-solving become almost impossible.
And this isn't new.
No, those numbers were reportedly unchanged since 2016, suggesting that the information echo chambers on each side have been hardened for years, creating these self-sealing bubbles of perceived truth. Each side genuinely believes the other side is operating with bad information or false premises.
Is it just hatred then? Effective polarization.
Well, experts studying polarization are somewhat divided on the primary driver. Some see Americans' mutual hostility, that affective polarization, as being at an all-time high, and that's the main engine.
Okay.
Others, like a recent Carnegie synthesis study, found something really interesting. Even when lab interventions temporarily reduced partisan dislike, made people feel less hostile towards the other side, it did not diminish their willingness to back anti-democratic actions by their own party.
Wow, so reducing the hate didn't make them more pro-democracy.
Exactly. That's a crucial insight. It suggests it's not just blind hatred fueling the base's loyalty or their willingness to tolerate norm-breaking. It's something deeper, perhaps an identity-driven conviction that anything goes if it protects one's group, their values, their perceived way of life.
The ends justify the means, driven by identity threat.
Precisely. The combination of these closed information loops and an almost existential fear of the opponent seems to have created a mindset in which facts matter less than tribe and democratic norms become optional, even inconvenient, when they conflict with what the base perceives as the survival of its values and identity. The leader, in this context, becomes the ultimate protector of the tribe, and any action they take, however norm-breaking, is rationalized as necessary for survival. Okay, maybe time for another quick micro-recap. We're delving deep into the psychology of loyalty here.
Yeah, good idea.
We're seeing how partisan identity, when it becomes this mega-identity, fueled by a sense of threat from the other side and sealed off by these information echo chambers.
Yeah, it's a powerful dynamic.
Right. It creates a dynamic where supporters not only tolerate but sometimes even cheer norm-breaking behavior from their leaders. They see it as necessary, even heroic action to protect their tribe from perceived enemies.
Loyalty trumps process. Okay, that's a powerful explanation of the what and the context. Now, let's dig even deeper into the why. What does political science and psychology specifically tell us about this party over democracy trade-off? What are the underlying mechanisms that make it so pervasive and, frankly, so resistant to facts or evidence?
Yeah, the research here is fascinating and, again, somewhat sobering. Political science and psychology studies have rigorously investigated this party over democracy trade-off that many, many voters seem willing to make.
What do they find?
Research by people like Yale's Mellon Svolek, among others, has consistently shown that only a really small minority of partisans consistently prioritize abstract democratic principles over ensuring their preferred party or candidate wins.
Only a small minority puts democracy first.
When push comes to shove, yes. The vast majority of voters, it seems, will tolerate significant undemocratic behavior by their side if the alternative is perceived as letting the hated other side win power.
The fear of the other side winning is greater than the commitment to democratic rules.
That appears to be the calculation for many. This has been demonstrated quite dramatically in experiments where voters explicitly chose a candidate from their own party, even after being told that candidate would engage in clearly anti-democratic actions if elected. The partisan identity was the overriding factor.
So why is party identity so powerful?
Well, a fundamental reason lies in how politics has become increasingly rooted in social identity, not just policy preferences. Liliana Mason, in her really important work, Uncivil Agreement, documents how Americans have sorted themselves into parties based not just on what they think about taxes or healthcare, but based on who they are.
Like their race, religion, where they live.
Exactly. Their ideology, race, religion, geography, even their lifestyle choices and cultural tastes have increasingly aligned with partisan divides. All these identities have collapsed onto the single dimension of party.
So changing parties feels like betraying yourself.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It feels less like a shift in policy opinion and more like betraying your fundamental group identity, abandoning your tribe. And Mason notes a crucial observation. People often adjust their policy views to match their party's stance. Rather than choosing a party based on pre-existing policy views, the party dictates the policy for many.
The identity comes first.
The identity is primary. And Ezra Klein, in Why We're Polarized, expands on this beautifully. He observes that our partisan affiliation now bundles so many different identities, social, cultural, religious, ideological, that it becomes a primary anchor of our personal identity.
A mega-identity.
Exactly. He vividly describes how we're so locked into our political identities that there is virtually no candidate, no information, no condition that can force us to change our minds. That might be a slight exaggeration, but the core point is powerful.
We justify anything for our side.
He argues, we will justify almost anything or anyone so long as it helps our side. And this inherent drive to defend the in-group actively erodes institutional guardrails and accountability mechanisms. Supporting the party becomes a matter of who you are, an expression of your core self, not a careful, rational weighing of policy pros and cons or adherence to abstract democratic principles.
And our brains are wired for this.
To a large extent, yes. This deep-seated identity loyalty is further reinforced by psychological mechanisms like motivated reasoning and a host of cognitive biases. Humans are inherently wired to defend their in-group and their cherished beliefs.
We protect our tribe.
We protect our tribe. We readily dismiss information that threatens our side or our leader, often labeling it as biased or simply false without deep engagement. And conversely, we uncritically accept almost anything that confirms our existing beliefs or flatters our group.
Confirmation bias on steroids.
Pretty much. Studies by Brendan Nyhan and Jason Reifler are famous here. They found that factual corrections often fail to reduce political misperceptions among committed partisans. Sometimes these corrections can even backfire.
Making people believe the falsehood even more strongly.
Yes, by reinforcing their sense that they are under attack by hostile forces pushing misinformation. While the backfire effect isn't universal, the broader point stands. True believers in a political tribe have robust mental defenses against inconvenient facts. They can remain impervious to external critique.
Because they live in those closed epistemic loops.
Exactly. They effectively live in self-sealing bubbles. For example, a hardcore partisan might only trust media outlets known to be friendly to their party, dismissing all mainstream news as fake or enemy propaganda without ever engaging with its actual content.
Curating their own reality.
They curate an information diet that never seriously questions their fundamental assumptions, creating this self-reinforcing bubble of perceived truth. The Pew Research Center vividly illustrates this, finding that Republicans and Democrats literally inhabit different news universes. They consume different sources, trust different sources, and therefore operate with different sets of facts.
And each side thinks the other side is the one being misled.
Overwhelmingly so. Remember that Pew poll showing 80% of Americans believe that voters on the other side are misled by different basic facts. Each side thinks the other is living in an alternate reality, and disturbingly, to a large extent, they might be correct about the divergence.
What's the impact of this epistemic closure?
It effectively insulates a leader's base from negative information. Scandals, dismissed as fake news or partisan attacks. Institutional warnings from courts, inspectors general, nonpartisan experts. Waved away as evidence of bias or part of a deep state conspiracy.
And psychologically, people want to reject criticism of their side.
Yes, this is called identity protective cognition. Psychologically, people actively reject evidence that would force them to criticize their own side or their leader because doing so would feel deeply uncomfortable. It would feel like betraying their group, questioning their own judgment, admitting vulnerability.
So instead, they double down.
They double down on defending the leader, rationalizing norm-breaking behavior as necessary, strategic, or even virtuous in the face of what they perceive as an existential threat from the opposing side.
So bringing it all together.
All of these factors, the party over democracy mindset, the fusion of party with personal identity, the mega-identity, the deep negative partisanship towards the rival camp, and these self-sealing information bubbles, they combine powerfully to explain why the base stays. Once political support becomes a core part of one's identity and worldview, rooted in tribal belonging, no amount of institutional alarm bells, legal challenges, or documented norm violations will easily shake that support. The tribe becomes the ultimate arbiter of truth and legitimacy for its members.
This really delves into the very core of human psychology and group dynamics, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just about what people believe, but why they believe it, and how deeply it's tied to their fundamental sense of self.
Precisely. The unshakable base isn't just a political phenomenon. It's a symptom of a deeper dynamic, where tribal loyalty overrides broader democratic principles or even objective facts. Let's try and distill these explanations from Chapter 4 into flashcards.
Okay, the psychology of the loyal base.
Right. First, mega-identity. Partisan identity encompassing core aspects of self-worldview, values, social group.
So you are.
Second, negative partisanship. Intense loathing and fear of the opposing side, fueling that powerful us versus them mentality.
Hating the other side drives loyalty.
Third, party over democracy trade-off. The demonstrated willingness of many partisans to sacrifice democratic principles for their team's victory.
Winning is everything.
Fourth, social identity, drawing on Mason. Party affiliation becomes deeply intertwined with personal identity, making switching feel like betrayal. Fifth, motivated reasoning. The cognitive bias, where we actively reject facts that challenge our in-group beliefs and readily accept those that confirm them.
Our brains protect our beliefs.
Sixth, closed epistemic loops. Those self-reinforcing information bubbles created by partisan media and social networks.
Different realities.
And seventh, identity protective cognition. The psychological drive to defend one side in leader, often by rationalizing norm-breaking behavior as necessary or justified.
Protecting the tribe, protecting the self. Powerful stuff. We've now seen how this operates in detail in Hungary and drawn strong parallels to the United States. But is this phenomenon of intense tribal loyalty coupled with democratic strain unique to these two countries? Or is this actually a global pattern we should be aware of, a broader challenge to liberal democracy worldwide?
That's a great question, and the answer is clear. This phenomenon of tribal loyalty amid democratic strain is absolutely not unique to the United States or Hungary. We see remarkably similar patterns globally. It really demonstrates how resilient a leader's base can be, even when faced with significant democratic erosion or highly controversial actions by that leader.
So it's not just an American or Hungarian problem.
Not at all. It seems to be a feature of modern polarized politics in many places, showcasing the power of identity politics and sophisticated information control.
Can you give us some powerful comparative examples from the sources?
Sure. Let's look at a few prominent cases. First, consider India under the BJP and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. His Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, has maintained overwhelming popular support.
Despite concerns about democratic backsliding.
Yes, despite significant concerns raised by international watchdogs and domestic critics about things like pressure on independent media, increased state surveillance, and policies that critics argue discriminate against religious minorities, particularly Muslims.
But his popularity remains high.
Consistently high. Modi frequently tops global leader approval charts, with opinion surveys often putting his approval rating in the 70-78% range in recent years. And this enduring popularity holds true even after policies and actions that many independent observers say clearly erode liberal democratic norms.
How does his base view his actions?
His base largely views Modi's strongman approach, his decisive style, as the leadership the people demanded. There's a powerful narrative of him restoring national pride, Hindu cultural identity, and bringing order and development.
So actions seen as anti-democratic by critics
Are often seen by supporters not as autocracy, but as fulfilling the majority's will, or as necessary steps to correct past wrongs or protect the nation. Crackdowns on dissent or policies favoring the majority religion are framed as strength, not oppression.
And loyalty within the party is strong.
Extremely high intra-party loyalty and Modi's undeniable personal charisma mean that India's ruling party suffers very little internal defection over concerns about democratic norms. Despite a slight electoral setback for the BJP coalition in 2024, the party remains dominant and Modi's core voters remain intensely loyal. They often perceive attacks on him as direct attacks on India itself.
So the government can push boundaries without losing the base.
Exactly. The base may even celebrate many of these moves as evidence of decisive, effective governance that serves their interests and identity.
Okay, another example.
Second, let's look at Poland under the Peace Party, the Law and Justice Party, when they were in power from 2015 to 2023.
Right, they also face criticism over democratic norms.
Significant democratic strain, yes. Notably, there was a widely documented collapse of judicial independence as peace leaders systematically sought to dominate the courts, putting loyalists in key positions and undermining judicial autonomy.
And this caused backlash.
Huge public protests within Poland and repeated warnings, even legal actions from the European Union. Yet despite these profound challenges to the rule of law, PS retained a remarkably cohesive and loyal base throughout its time in power.
How loyal was the base?
Surveys showed the core PS electorate was extraordinarily loyal. One study found a staggering 81% of PS voters completely trusted their party far more than supporters of other parties trusted theirs, and 71% stated they had no second-choice party at all.
Wow, completely locked in.
Pretty much. Almost the entire PS base was locked in, seeing no acceptable alternative. And this intense loyalty was bolstered by PS' potent blend of nationalist and Catholic-infused messaging.
What was their narrative?
They portrayed their agenda, including the controversial judicial reforms and taking control of state media, as vital for cultural restoration, defending Poland's true traditional values against liberal, secular, and foreign influences. Many supporters genuinely believed PS's claims that independent institutions like the judiciary were elitist, corrupt, or somehow un-Polish, and thus needed purging.
And negative partisanship played a role, too.
A crucial role. PS voters were motivated perhaps as much by deep antipathy towards the liberal opposition, who they often saw as corrupt, unpatriotic, or subservient to Brussels, as by a positive love for PS itself.
So they held on to power for a long time despite the concerns.
Yes. Thanks to this tribal loyalty, PS won re-election decisively in 2019 and only narrowly lost power in 2023, even after years of significant, documented democratic backsliding. The lesson is clear. A determined ruling party can degrade checks and balances and undermine democratic norms, yet maintain its base, so long as that base is ideologically unified and constantly fed a narrative of cultural grievance and existential threat from the other. PS supporters effectively made norm-breaking a non-issue because they saw the liberal opposition as the greater danger.
Okay, one more global example.
Finally, let's look at Brazil under Jair Bolsonaro. A classic right-wing populist, Bolsonaro cultivated a fervent, almost cult-like base that stuck with him through numerous, often staggering institutional crises.
What kind of crises?
During his presidency from 2019 to 2022, Bolsonaro systematically attacked Brazil's electoral institutions, spread baseless conspiracies about voting fraud, sound familiar, presided over a surge in Amazon deforestation, and faced widespread criticism for his government's mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So lots of controversy.
Immense controversy. By 2021-22, Brazil's democratic institutions were under immense stress. Bolsonaro narrowly lost re-election in a very tight 2022 race. But even after his defeat, perhaps even more tellingly, after the shocking violent attack by his supporters on Brazilia's government buildings on January 8th, 2023.
Brazil's January 6th moment.
Exactly. Even after that, Bolsonarismo remains deeply rooted and a potent political force in Brazil.
The base stayed loyal even after the loss and the riot.
Remarkably so. A poll in early 2023 found that 39% of Brazilians still rated Bolsonaro's presidency as great or good. Only 25% called it terrible. And an astonishing 41% said they would definitely vote for him if he ran again. This, despite everything, is a powerful testament to how resilient his base's loyalty is.
And do they share a different reality, too? Tribal epistemics.
Absolutely. Classic tribal epistemics in action. After the January 8th riot, remember, 39% of Bolsonaro voters believed the utterly false claim that left-wing infiltrators were to blame for the violence, or rather than Bolsonaro's own extremist supporters who were documented carrying it out.
Wow. A complete rejection of evidence.
In their information bubble, Bolsonaro is a patriot saving Brazil from communists and corrupt elites. Any institutional action against him, investigations, legal rulings, is reflexively viewed as political persecution.
And did his supporters see norm-breaking as a negative?
Quite the opposite for many. The base's mindset seemed to make norm-breaking into a virtue. Bolsonaro openly flaunted his disregard for political correctness, for established institutions, for expert advice, and his supporters often loved him for it. They saw it as authentic, as strong leadership the people demanded.
Like Trump's appeal to some voters.
A very similar dynamic. They prioritized the identity gratification they got from seeing their values loudly asserted, their enemies attacked, over any abstract concerns about checks and balances or institutional norms. Even with Bolsonaro now out of office and facing legal challenges, Bolsonarism lives on as a potent cultural and political force, largely impervious to many facts, convinced that only their leader truly speaks for the real Brazil.
So the pattern holds.
It showcases again, when politics becomes doubly tribal, a significant segment of voters will stick with a norm-busting leader almost to the bitter end, prioritizing their tribal identity and the perceived fight against their enemies above all else.
These global examples truly drive home that this isn't just an American or Hungarian issue, is it? It seems to be a systemic vulnerability in modern democracies when a tribal identity takes precedence over process or principles.
Indeed. The common threads across India, Poland, Brazil, Hungary, and the U.S. are striking. They offer a wider lens through which to understand the challenges facing liberal democracy globally. Let's do a quick summary of these global patterns, flashcard style again for Chapter 5.
Okay, comparative tribal loyalty.
Right. First, India, Modi. Strongman leader appeal, narrative of cultural pride and national restoration, high approval despite documented backsliding. Base sees strength, not autocracy.
Got it.
Second, Poland. P.S. Systematic judicial capture met with intense base loyalty, fueled by a cultural restoration narrative, defense against perceived liberal foreign threats, and strong negative partisanship.
Loyalty despite institutional damage.
Third, Brazil, Bolsonaro. Repeated attacks on institutions, yet a resilient base even after electoral defeat and political violence, driven by tribal epistemics, alternate facts, and identity gratification over process.
The base remains potent.
And the commonality across all these cases, norm-breaking behavior is often accepted, rationalized, or even celebrated by the base if it's perceived to benefit our side and harm the enemies. Identity politics overrides democratic norms.
A sobering global picture. So we've explored the mechanics of backsliding, the deep psychological roots of why a base sticks with a norm-breaking leader, and seen global examples. Now, let's turn directly to the narratives themselves, the justifications offered by supporters. What are the common arguments that people make for sticking with leaders who break democratic norms? How do they rationalize it to themselves and others?
Yeah, this is crucial understanding the internal logic or perhaps rationalization of the supporters. When you ask a diehard supporter why they stick with a leader who clearly subverts democratic norms, you'll hear remarkably consistent justifications across different countries and contexts.
What's the most common one?
Many will claim, often very forcefully, we need strong leadership. The ends justify the means. They'll argue that their champion is finally doing what the people demanded, that the leader is simply responding to the true, often silenced will of the nation, which was perhaps ignored or suppressed by previous weaker leaders or by out-of-touch, entrenched elites.
So the leader is just fulfilling a mandate.
That's the core claim. Other common justifications often revolve around what we might call cultural restoration.
Saving the nation's soul.
Something like that. The leader is seen as actively saving the nation's true identity, its traditional values, from corrosive forces, maybe cosmopolitan elites, maybe foreign influences, maybe internal minorities or woke ideologies. In this view, such a vital existential mission warrants extraordinary measures, even if they deviate significantly from established democratic norms or legal precedents. The stakes are perceived as too high for normal rules.
And what about elections? How do they factor in?
That's another key justification. Supporters often insist that because the leader or party won an election, even if it was a narrow victory, or if, as we've discussed, the playing field wasn't level, anything they do subsequently reflects the majority's will.
Winning equals a blank check.
It's a crucial rationalization. If we won, then we have a mandate to do whatever we deem necessary, and anyone who opposes us is inherently defying the legitimate will of the people. It becomes anti-democratic to oppose the winner.
And in the U.S. context?
In the U.S. context, for example, Trump's backers often assert that he represents the real American majority, maybe a silent majority, that traditional polls or institutions fail to acknowledge or respect. Therefore, they argue, actions like undermining bureaucratic norms, defying legal challenges, or even questioning election results are acceptable, perhaps even necessary, to deliver on that perceived majority's wishes against entrenched opposition. It's a powerful narrative that directly conflates electoral victory, however achieved, with almost unlimited executive power and popular legitimacy.
Okay, so those are the justifications offered by the base. Now let's put these justifications under the microscope. Do they actually hold up to scrutiny? Or are they, as you hinted, convenient rationalizations that tend to collapse once you start applying rigorous analysis and looking at the actual facts?
They almost universally crumble under scrutiny. They are, in essence, often self-serving myths constructed to legitimize power grabs, and they mask a very different, often anti-democratic reality.
Okay, let's break them down. What about the overwhelming popular mandate claim?
Well, first, let's address that myth of an overwhelming popular mandate. The reality is, far from reflecting some broad, unified people's will, many of these regimes actually govern via minority rule or very narrow pluralities.
They don't actually have majority support.
Often not. Take Donald Trump's 2024 return to the White House. He secured the Electoral College win, yes, but with only 49.8% of the popular vote. That's a plurality, not an absolute majority of Americans who voted.
So slightly more people voted for other candidates combined?
Exactly. And this pattern is common globally. Remember Poland's PS. They won power with just 43.6% of the vote in 2019. Bolsonaro won Brazil's presidency with 55% in 2018, but then lost his re-election bid in 2022. India's BJP, while appearing dominant because of the parliamentary system, often wins barely 40% of the national popular vote.
So the claim of representing the people is often exaggerated.
Massively exaggerated. The conclusion is stark. Claims of a unified people's will backing these leaders are frequently myths. These leaders are often elevated by fervent pluralities, sometimes even minorities, due to electoral system quirks, not broad national consensus. Yet they govern as if they have an absolute mandate from everyone.
And how do disinformation and identity politics play into this?
Secondly, these leaders then strategically use disinformation and potent identity narratives to inflate their perceived mandate and simultaneously demonize all opposition, further solidifying their base and justifying their actions.
Like election denialism.
Election denialism is a prime example. In the U.S., Trump and his media allies saturated his base with false claims that any election he loses must be fraudulent. Remember, as of late 2023, nearly 70% of Republicans still believed the demonstrably false claim that Joe Biden's 2020 victory was illegitimate.
That belief creates a sense of constant threat.
Exactly. Right? Fueled by such conspiracy theories and relentless us versus them rhetoric, the base perceives a constant existential threat from the other side. The election was stolen, our culture is under attack, they are trying to destroy our way of life. This manufactured sense of crisis is then used to justify extreme measures by their leader, who is framed as the only one strong enough or willing enough to fight back against these existential threats.
So it's not the majority's will, but a frightened faction's will.
Precisely. It's often a frightened or aggrieved faction clinging to power or seeking to regain it through appeals to alternate facts and often leveraging anti-majoritarian features of the political system.
What about the argument that winning an election gives you the right to do anything?
Thirdly, and this is fundamental, democratic legitimacy requires far, far more than simply winning one election. It fundamentally requires the acceptance of an eventual alternation of power and a consistent adherence to fair rules and established democratic norms, even when they are inconvenient.
You have to accept you might lose next time.
That's the bedrock principle. Healthy democracies operate on the foundational acceptance that you win and you lose at times. No single side, no single leader governs indefinitely, and crucially, no leader is above the law or the Constitution.
So claiming a permanent mandate based on one win is undemocratic?
It's fundamentally anti-democratic. When a leader claims a permanent mandate to flout established norms, whether by firing independent inspectors, defying legitimate court orders, or unilaterally rewriting the rules to favor themselves, simply because my base wants it, that leader is betraying the core democratic principle that rules trump individual will. The rule of law, not the momentary will of a specific leader or their faction, must be supreme.
And that feeling of identity gratification supporters get, does that justify anything?
Fourthly, no. That identity gratification, the psychic satisfaction supporters feel when their leader owns the outgroup, when their values are loudly asserted and their perceived enemies are frustrated or attacked, that feeling is not a warrant for executive impunity. It just isn't.
Why not?
Because executive power in a functioning democracy is deliberately constrained. It's constrained by constitutions, by independent oversight bodies, by protections for minority rights, precisely so that the nation isn't governed solely by one faction's emotions, grievances, or desires. A leader's job is to govern for all citizens within the bounds of the law, not just to cater to the emotional needs or validate the prejudices of their base.
What about the strong leadership argument? Sometimes rules need to be broken.
Fifth, that notion of strong leadership becomes incredibly dangerous when strength is defined primarily as ignoring checks and balances, or as bypassing established democratic processes in the name of efficiency or decisiveness.
History warns against that, right?
History provides ample, tragic evidence that unchecked leaders, even those initially popular and claiming to act solely for the people, often end up eroding the very rights and freedoms of the people they claim to represent. True democratic leadership often means exercising restraint. It sometimes means telling your own supporters no when they demand illiberal actions, when they call for shortcuts that violate core principles, or when they demand that the leader break the rules simply for partisan gain. It means respecting the process even when it's inconvenient or when it slows down desired policy outcomes.
So the idea that you have to break democracy to save it, that's a false trade-off.
In some, yes. The base may rationalize norm breaking as necessary, perhaps strategically brilliant, to achieve their desired outcomes. They might believe it's a necessary shortcut to enact their agenda or protect their culture, but this is almost always a false trade-off. A democracy that abandons its fundamental rules and norms simply to gratify one tribe's desires or fears ceases to be a democracy in any meaningful sense. It becomes an illiberal regime, a majoritarian or even minority autocracy sustained by exclusion, misinformation, and the suppression of dissent.
So why do these justifications ultimately fail?
The justifications of strongman politics fundamentally fail because they dismiss the core idea that nobody, not even a popularly elected figure, not even someone claiming to represent the true people, is above the law or beyond accountability in a constitutional democracy. As political scientist Aziz Hook put it, constitutional democracy is built on foundations of institutional forbearance, the willingness of political actors to exercise restraint even when they have the power to push boundaries and mutual toleration respecting the legitimacy of the opposition. Once those are cast aside in the name of winning or fighting, the door is wide open to authoritarianism.
So the base might cheer now.
The base might stay now. Yes, they might cheer on the norm breaking as a satisfying shortcut to policy wins or cultural dominance. But in the long run, they too invariably pay the price when the rule of law erodes for everyone, when institutions lose their legitimacy, and when political disputes are resolved by raw power rather than established rules. Democratic legitimacy can only be sustained by recommitting to fair rules, to mutual respect, and to the fundamental possibility of alternation in power. Anything less is just minority rule cloaked in the deceptive language of the people.
That's a powerful and, I think, essential breakdown. It really forces us to confront the fundamental difference between raw political power or tribal victory and legitimate democratic governance.
Indeed. Recognizing these flawed justifications, seeing through the rhetoric, is vital for maintaining a clear understanding of democratic principles, especially when they are under strain. Let's summarize why those loyalist narratives ultimately fail. Maybe one last set of flashcards for Chapter 6.
Okay, why the justifications crumble?
Right. First, myths of mandate. Remember, these leaders often win by plurality or narrow margins, not some overwhelming absolute majority. The will of the people claim is often false.
Check the popular vote.
Always check the numbers. Second, Disinformation loop. False claims, like stolen elections, are used strategically to fuel the base's sense of threat and justify extreme measures. It's manufactured urgency.
Not organic popular demand.
Third, legitimacy versus election win. Democratic legitimacy requires more than just winning one election. It demands adherence to fair rules, respect for norms, and the acceptance of potential alternation in power.
Winning isn't a license to break rules.
Fourth, identity impunity. That feeling of identity gratification for the base is not a valid justification for executive overreach or ignoring checks and balances. Emotions don't trump the Constitution.
Right.
Fifth, false trade-off. Abandoning democratic norms and processes in pursuit of specific policy outcomes ultimately leads to illiberalism, not sustainable solutions. It corrupts the system itself.
You destroy the thing you claim to be using.
Exactly. And finally, sixth, constitutional forbearance is crucial. Democracy requires mutual toleration and respect for rules and institutions, not just the exercise of raw power by whoever holds office at the moment. Restraint is essential.
Powerful points to remember. Okay, to anchor this entire deep dive, before we wrap up, let's quickly reinforce some foundational baseline facts that underpin everything we've discussed today. These are crucial realities, mostly from the U.S. context you provided, that paint a clear picture of the current political landscape and connect directly to the lessons we've learned from Hungary and these broader themes of democratic strain and tribalism.
Yeah, these baseline facts are vital context. They're not opinions. They're data points that provide the empirical backdrop for understanding why the subtle erosion of democracy and the power of tribalism are such potent forces right now. Let's go through them concisely, just hitting the key numbers and their implications.
Okay, First,
let's look again at the 2024 U.S. election results. As we mentioned, Donald Trump won the 2024 U.S. presidential election without winning the popular vote majority.
the numbers again.
He secured 312 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 226, but carried only 49.8% of the popular vote. Harris earned 48.3%, with others getting about 1.9%.
And the implication.
The implication is critical and reinforces our earlier point. A second-term Trump presidency rests on a plurality, not an absolute majority of voters. It starkly illustrates that gap between electoral victory under the current system and broad popular support across the electorate. It feeds directly into debates about mandate and legitimacy.
Okay, second baseline fact.
Second, we look at Democratic backsliding as reflected in the U.S. Freedom House score. This is a respected international measure. The United States Global Freedom Rating has declined notably over the past decade or so.
How much of a decline?
The country's Freedom House score, which assesses political rights and civil liberties on a 100-point scale, was 94 out of 100 back in 2010. Pretty high. But by the early 2020s, it had dropped significantly to 83 out of 100.
That's a significant drop.
It is. The implication is profound. This 80-30-100 score is the lowest U.S. score on record from Freedom House. It reflects a concerning erosion in political rights and civil liberties during the Trump era and its aftermath. While the U.S. is still rated overall as free, this substantial 11-point drop since 2010 signals significant democratic backsliding, making those parallels to places like Hungary feel much more immediate and relevant.
Okay, third point.
Third, we absolutely must acknowledge the level of extreme partisan animosity. It's not just disagreement, it's dislike. Partisan antipathy is reportedly at record levels.
How bad is it?
As of 2022 data, a staggering 72% of Republicans and 63% of Democrats told pollsters that members of the other party are more immoral than other Americans. Not just wrong on policy, but immoral.
Wow.
And similar large majorities in each party viewed supporters of the other party as more dishonest, more closed-minded, and even less intelligent than other Americans.
What's the implication of that?
The implication is dire for democratic health. These figures have roughly doubled since the 2010s. It's a stark indicator of what political scientists call affective polarization, a deep, visceral, mutual dislike between partisans. It's moved beyond policy disagreement into viewing the other side's supporters in sharply negative moral terms. This makes compromise, finding common ground, or even acknowledging a shared reality incredibly difficult.
Okay, fourth baseline fact.
Fourth, we turn to the persistence of misinformation and election denialism. A large and deeply concerning segment of the electorate continues to believe demonstrably false narratives, largely split along partisan lines.
Specifically about the 2020 election.
Yes. By late 2023, nearly 3 years after the 2020 election, polls consistently found that almost 70% of Republicans still believed that Joe Biden's 2020 victory was illegitimate.
70%, even years later.
70%. The implication here is critical for understanding the current landscape. This false belief in a stolen election, which has been fueled by relentless repetition of lies and conspiracy theories by prominent figures and media outlets, has not only persisted, but in some measures even grown among GOP voters. It vividly demonstrates how effective disinformation campaigns and partisan echo chambers have been in creating and maintaining an alternate reality for a significant portion of the base.
And the consequences.
Such widespread election denialism directly contributed to extraordinary events like the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack, and it continues to profoundly undermine trust in U.S. electoral democracy itself, particularly the peaceful transfer of power.
Okay, and the final baseline fact.
Finally, let's consider ideological polarization and sorting. Americans are more ideologically sorted into their respective parties than at any time in recent memory. The parties are becoming more internally uniform and more distinct from each other.
What does the data show?
According to Gallup polling into 2025, the share of Americans self-identifying as politically moderate hit a record low of just 34%. The middle ground is shrinking. Meanwhile, 77% of Republicans now identify as conservative, with only 18% calling themselves moderate, and 55% of Democrats identify as liberal, with only 34% moderate.
So each party is more purely conservative or liberal.
Exactly. The implication of this ideological sorting is profound. Each party is more internally homogenous in its thinking and, crucially, significantly further apart from the other party on the ideological spectrum. The overlap, the middle ground where compromise might happen, has dwindled dramatically.
And how does this connect to our themes?
This trend underpins many of this deep dive's core themes. With fewer moderates and fewer overlapping identities between the parties, compromise becomes exponentially harder. The perceived stakes of each election in the minds of committed partisans get higher and higher. This directly feeds the intense tribalism, the negative partisanship, and the dangerous zero-sum mentality where the other side winning feels like an existential catastrophe. These are the hard realities on the ground that create fertile soil for democratic backsliding and make the warnings from Hungary and elsewhere so pertinent. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, so pulling this all together after that deep dive, what Hungary teaches us, loud and clear, is that you can slide out of a functioning liberal democracy without most citizens ever registering a discrete before and after moment.
It's a slow fade, not a sudden snap.
Right. It's not about looking for that single dramatic moment, the tanks or the coup. It's about recognizing a cumulative, often subtle shift through things like changes in jurisprudence that erode accountability.
Expanding executive power legally.
The repoliticization of the civil service, the sophisticated soft control of information environments, and the normalization of a constant state of perceived emergency.
All pieces of the Frankenstate puzzle.
Exactly. And the expert communities, the VDEMs, the European parliaments, they will call this trend early. They did with Hungary years ago. But mass recognition, as we've seen so clearly, often lags dangerously behind.
Sometimes until the alternation power becomes practically impossible.
Because the system's been too fundamentally rewired. And that lag, you the listener, that gap between expert warning and public realization. That is the strategic window autocrats seize to entrench their power.
Which raises a really important practical question for anyone concerned about democratic health. If you want to know whether you're still living in a truly liberal democracy, you need to stop asking just whether the government won an election.
That's too simple a metric.
It's the most basic formal ritual, but it tells you very little about the actual substance of governance or the protection of rights. Instead, maybe ask you these critical questions. Think of them as transferable heuristics, diagnostic tools.
Okay, what are they?
First, 1. Can the opposition realistically win under the rules currently in place? Are the electoral rules fundamentally fair? Or are they consistently being refitted, maybe through gerrymandering, voter access laws, campaign finance loopholes to systematically favor one side? Is there a genuine practical possibility of power changing hands, or has the playing field been tilted too far?
A crucial first question.
Second, 2, do critical media and independent NGOs operate without significant structural disadvantage? Are they truly free to scrutinize power, to investigate and report uncomfortable truths? Or are they facing subtle but effective administrative intimidation, resource deprivation, or regulatory burdens that make their essential work incredibly difficult, even if they aren't explicitly banned?
Is the watchdog being starved or muzzled?
Right. Third. 3, are emergency powers strictly temporally bounded and subject to independent supervision? Or do temporary measures, declared in times of crisis, have a habit of becoming permanent fixtures of governance, allowing the executive to routinely bypass normal legislative and judicial checks indefinitely?
Has the exception become the rule?
And four, are key figures in the justice system judges and prosecutors chosen and promoted primarily based on merit and impartiality, or increasingly based on political loyalty? Does the justice system fundamentally serve the law, applied equally to everyone, or does it appear to bend to partisan will, becoming a tool to reward friends and punish enemies?
The weaponization of justice question.
Exactly. Hungary's entire experience, as we've unpacked, shows just how easily the answers to these crucial questions can drift, slowly but surely, from a clear yes towards a very worrying no, all while most people still hear the word democracy being used and assume everything's fundamentally okay because the outward rituals, like voting, are still maintained.
The facade remains intact.
The facade remains. So, the final provocative question for you to mull over, dear listener, after considering all this, is perhaps this. What responsibility do individual citizens bear to actively discern these subtle, often incremental shifts, to look beyond the superficial rituals and truly try to understand the substance of their governance? And what actions, if any, might be required of citizens when democracy itself risks becoming merely a word, a comforting label detached from the lived reality of how power is actually exercised, constrained, and held accountable?